Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mental Health TV. We're really pleased to have you with us, despite it being such a hot day. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight. We've got a really interesting topic and very interesting guest. I'll introduce them in a moment. But we're going to be talking about public health, community-based health, assets, all that sort of things. It'll be a very wide-ranging conversation. And before we get started, let me hand you over to Dave to tell you how you can join in, or just remind you how you can join in, because we really love to hear from you. Dave?
Hi, everyone. Yes, so tonight, if you would like to join in the Facebook Live session, all you need to do is either post on the Facebook Live feed or head over to Twitter and use the hashtag MHTV. We'll try and bring in any comments, questions that we can on either of those tonight. But without further ado, straight back over to you, Nicky.
Okay, and to Heather. So Heather, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, hello, my name is Heather. And I'm a Queen's nurse, first of all, which started from the Queen's Nursing Institute, meaning that I show quality and leadership in community nursing. I'm a nurse and entrepreneur, have two businesses, Brightness Management Limited and BreathChamps CIC, and loads of other things. Trusty in the third sector, like to write a lot, like to photograph things a lot. I'm generally curious about all things nursing.
Absolutely. So we've tweeted out your links to your websites and to your Twitter feed. So if anybody wants to make sure that they are tuned into what you're doing, they can follow those links through, and we'll be doing that as we keep going through. So I guess one of the things that really jumps out in terms of the tons of roles that you do is kind of leadership. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts on leadership, because remember when we first started talking about it, you were talking about the importance of understanding your worth. And I think sometimes that can be quite hard for nurses.
Yeah, so strange things happened in lockdown. So I was approached by the publisher Elsevier because I'd written a chapter in a charity book on a survival guide to general practice nursing. And I was asked, do I want to write a book on leadership for student nurses? So I had to think about that for a while, and then decided that if I was to write a book on leadership for student nurses, I'd better work alongside student nurses, because it's a long time since I was one. And who am I to write for them without knowing them? So I practice an asset and strengths-based approach, which means that the student nurses became my equal partner. I saw them as assets, and I saw them as having strengths. And what I identified fairly early on, because I interviewed student nurses and put their case studies in my book, hopefully coming out next year, is that they underestimated themselves massively. They have this vision of leadership as being the person in charge, when actually you can be a leader at any level. And there are different ways of being a leader, of course, but it's for you as a person, as a nurse, to be able to identify what your strengths are, what you're good at, rather than what we usually do, which is where are the areas that you're weak and let's make it up. And the student nurses that I met, I describe it really as like walking a tightrope. So usually they were driven, the leaders, student nurse community, were driven by passion and values, clear as day, same as me. And when they followed that passion and values, they sort of walked ahead on the tightrope, and they were really confident. And then when somebody said to them, oh, you know, you're a great leader and things like that, they went, you know, who, me? I mean, these are, as you know, some of the student nurses we have today are extremely mature. They've had other careers, they're family people, and yet they just weren't confident. And I think a lot of that is the way that students are treated. I mean, I know you've got a session on not just student, and that's what I would say to them. So it took me a long time as a leader to know who I was. I'm not the sort of person who leads large organizations. I'm really not. I'm the sort of person who comes up and has an idea and speaks about it, like I'm doing now. You know, inspires people. But if you ask me to follow through long term in the sort of organisational context, I'm really rubbish. Please
There's
don't.
different types of leadership, isn't there? Yeah, you're right.
Know yourself. I think you really have to know yourself and know your strengths.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's true for nurses too, because nurses are surrounded by other nurses most of the time. They don't realise how special they are. Organisational skills, ethical skills, the ability to manage change processes. I mean, I've never seen a time in the NHS even, or even in the public sector, where we just weren't completely changing all the time. You know, this mythical time when everything's going to settle down. That's never going to happen because it's not real. You know, we were always making the best of a challenging situation, and then thinking about how to make the most of the assets that we've got. And I think you're absolutely right. The idea about asset-based work and strength, recognising strengths, is key for us to move forward. Why do you think it can be so hard to do sometimes?
I think it's the culture of organisations. Although I think that's changing. You know, I think there's a lot written about leadership at the moment, and a lot of stress on developing leadership capabilities, including in the undergraduate curriculum. But I think it's a cultural thing that quite often we're not good at going up to people and say, you were really good at that as well. And so people don't know. I didn't know really until a few chief executives did help me along the way before I left the NHS 11 years ago. But I think there's a lot of people who are admired from afar, and actually you should go up to them and tap them on the shoulder. I do that all the time. And I tell them how great they really are. And also, you know, I try and do this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy thing. Do that with community members as well. Go up to them and say, have you ever thought of doing X? And maybe I can introduce you to Y. Because I'm a serial connector. We need to do that for our student nurses and for our future leaders. Think about how we can help them on the next stage of their journey. And
I mean, no one just bounces out, do they? Knowing everything and knowing everybody and having connections. But sometimes they're sort of like senior colleagues, people just a bit further on. If they just looked and saw who was coming through, they could realise how quickly they could be like, you need to speak to this person, or they love what you're doing. That would be really helpful. So when you're talking about connecting, is that what you're talking about, being that kind of facilitator?
Yes. Yes. So in complexity theory, if you want to look it up, there's being a serial connector, because what I see things in patterns, Nicky. And I gather that not everybody does that. But I do. I see things in patterns, and, you know, I'll talk about what might seem to others as a random selection of things, but to my mind, they're all connected. And then I will see how that person can, if they were linked to that person, then that would help them with something else. So, I also know a lot of people. You know, I know a huge number of people. That's another of my strengths. So I can help leaders coming along to say, oh, you really need to talk to them. Because I see it. You know, I'm a futurist. I'm not in the present generally. My husband will no doubt tell you.
maybe he'll tweet us. There's something kind of leads us on to the next sort of thing, because you were talking about kind of being sort of entrepreneurial as well, and that's something which, again, not all nurses think about. I wondered, because you were looking at solving problems in a slightly different way. If you can tell us a little bit about how you come to do that. Yeah,
it was by accident, really. So I was made compulsorily redundant as a commissioner some time ago, 11 years ago. And so I set myself up as a company in order to trade. That's what you do. And then I was on secondment at the time I was made redundant to a huge public health programme running sort of adjacent to Marmot called Healthy Places, Healthy Lives. And I started working alongside 4 communities across England, it was, doing different things. And then I realised that I had a lot of freedom. So, for example, in Hereford, we were working in Herefordshire with a county contractor, you know, a council contractor called Amy. I'll name them because it was really good experience. And we worked on the idea that actually the routine and manual workers, who are the last ones to give up smoking in evidence, could help each other to give up smoking rather than necessarily, primary care or NHS services. And we got the same sort of results by training up co-workers to work with each other, and found ways around the prescribing of nicotine replacement therapy and all sorts of things like that. And these sorts of experiences just emboldened me to go, well, first of all, I trained in asset-based community development with the University of Exeter and connecting communities with my mentor, Hazel Stuteley, who's a retired health visitor. And then it just occurred to me that communities were full of strengths and assets. And, if the routine and manual workers in Amy can help each other to give up smoking in various ways, what else can be done? So let's give it a bash. We'll start from there.
So how did you get from realizing that people can help themselves if you just give them some support to get started? How did you get from there to actually thinking of BreathChamps and Breath Stars? How did that go across?
Well, I kept being asked by two main customers, really. I think as a business. The first one was C2, so I spent time. I was apprenticed to Hazel because you can't learn about asset-based community development without doing it and having somebody at the end of the phone saying, "How did it go? Did you try it like this and did you try it like that?" So having that from somebody who was a trained health visitor as well. The stuff that I do is not unusual, by the way, Nicky. These are the things that primary and community nurses have always done, except that I have the time to do it now. But we can get onto that maybe. And then my second main customer was a social enterprise in Salford called Unlimited Potential, led by what I consider to be one of the finest social entrepreneurs in the country, Chris Dabbs. He's an anthropologist. So I work with a lot of people who are not nurses. Well, do public health, so of course I do. Yeah. And so he does social experiments. So I did about I've done about 6, maybe more, social experiments with Unlimited Potential. Yeah. And it sort of blew my mind, really. Not everything works. Of course it doesn't.
Yeah.
And then from there, I was working with Unlimited Potential and all of the GP practices in Eccles, 7 GP practices in Eccles. And we did some asthma parties. That was slightly me influencing. I don't normally, but
what's an asthma party?
A group consultation for children with asthma,
right?
AKA asthma parties.
No, I get it now. Exactly. An asthma party is a party where you talk about asthma. I get that now. I can see why you called it that.
You play games. So part of this social experiment was it was about co-production. Could the 7 practices go into equal partnership with the people of Winton? It was actually Winton, which is a sort of a subpopulation of Eccles in Salford. That was interesting in itself in terms of how the community felt about being in partnership with GPs. They didn't see it as an equal partnership, not at all. And they were sort of slightly shocked to be in a meeting with their practice manager or their GP. But they helped me hugely and said, well, would you be up for an asthma party? What should we do? Should we do it like this or should we do it like that? Should we play games? Should we sing songs? And BreathChamps CIC started from there about 4 years ago in a school followed by a church hall in Winton.
So that leads on to nothing. My mind's, there's so many things that you do. But I guess there's something around the way that and when you're talking about like an asthma party or something like that, that's really unusual. I know you say that everyone does, not everyone does this. A lot of people will give information, they'll give a leaflet, they'll do something that's quite static, or it'll be quite, as you say, not an equal partnership, it'll be somebody telling somebody else about their own experience, which is really, it doesn't sit great. So when you're talking about information, you're talking about storytelling, you're talking play. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I think a lot of practitioners would find that really helpful, really interesting.
Well, first of all, I think you've got to know who you're talking to, and the community is incredibly differentiated. So I've learned this also with. So I was working with a couple of estates, hard-pressed estates, who were, first of all, it was about building my relationship with them. And that took quite a long while of sitting in coffee mornings with a group of mothers who were really very scary, by the way. And I remember the point when our relationship became more solid was when they said to me, I mean, really quite boisterous, and they looked at me and they said, "Are we scaring you?" And I went, "Well, yeah, you are actually." And then they just burst out laughing. Yeah. And then they told me that I was one of them, which is never true. It's never true because I come from Sale, which is like 7 miles away, but a different universe. But I think having that relationship where they actually trusted me, and then they knew I had asthma. I'm very open about my lung condition and how it affects me, both physically and emotionally. I'll probably be hyperventilating all the way through this, for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing. And then I said to them, would you like to do asthma parties, aka group consultations, and the school that I was working with, Westwood Park Primary, and the school said, "Oh, come in, let's do that." And I sort of, I like writing children's stories. I'd already written one about Billy the Kid beats Rosie's rash. I was doing another project at the same time in Winton, which was about using pharmacy first, using community pharmacies before going to GP. And I knew that I could write stories, so I thought I'll write some stories. So I've written a whole series of stories about asthma. And then what happens is you end up in the same group of mothers, really scary mothers, who, and I give them my story and they read it out in front of you and stop at the end of every paragraph and discuss it amongst themselves in front of you, which is really quite an event. Yeah. Fortunately, they liked it. And then give the same story to a couple of children, actually, that I know that are friends of one of the Salford dads, the fathers that I worked with, and ask them to mark my homework, which their faces were a picture, Nicky. You should have seen. Will you mark my homework? And these two children, they were about 9 and 7 at the time, decided to mark my homework, and they gave me 9 out of 10 because I'd missed some punctuation. Yeah. So I do a lot of work in terms of, I put my clinical information in, I put my whole self in. I don't, the sort of professional boundary that I have when I do asthma-based community development is a lot different to say if you're a nurse on a ward. There is a boundary, there absolutely is. But the amount of relationship, the amount of myself that I have to put in, but I'm comfortable in disclosing to people, knowing that it could go anywhere at any time, but never really has. And they know everything about the community. Yeah. And it's a partnership. And the greatest gift I ever learned doing asthma-based community development was humility. I am not right a lot of the time. Some of my ideas, I was doing a little puppet show. It's on BreathChamps YouTube channel called Asthma and Sport. And I'm working with a puppeteer called Jamie Marks. And I gave him a script based on what the professor of sports science had told me, 5 points about children and asthma. And basically he said to me, because he's autistic, so he's openly autistic, by the way. And he said to me, now, basically, we're not saying it like that. We're going to say it like this. Because I'm the puppeteer and this is how it has to be. So he changed the script. It's actually really great. Yeah. And I'm like, oh gosh, I did all that wrong then. And he changed it for me and it was just really great.
So I think there's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that you're saying, which I think, you don't seem to find them as hard as maybe some other professionals do. So stuff like there's something around having a great respect for the people that you're working with. Because, I mean, hard-pressed communities know fine well what people say about them and how some people talk and think about them and their potential for well-being. And they hear it all the time in the media, and I'm sure that they've had it from professionals from time to time. So actually being able to go in and actually value a community in the same way that you would want unconditional positive regard for a person, being able to do that for a community is really important, and be vulnerable. You know, like you're saying, like letting people mark your work, tell you you're wrong, change, that can be really hard for some people. Have you got any advice for staff how they can think about that? And then we'll obviously go over to Dave, because this is his area, so soon.
I've been trained, you know, I was trained by the best, by a health visitor, you know, and she told me that you have to really listen. Above all, I think you have to listen to people with humility. And I got things wrong. I remember meeting somebody in the middle of on Fossil Road in Coventry, a huge multiracial community, and I said we're going to have a coffee morning and we're going to share, you know, let people know about our community partnership, and we're going to do some business cards, and and this lady who's also called Heather, actually, she doesn't use that name though, and she said to me, basically, Heather, you don't want to be making these business cards too fancy because nobody's going to pick them up if you make them too professional. You know, these little details, and, you know, you have to start taking it on the chin, because, you know, if they can't talk to you honestly about what's going on, I'm a firm believer that the community, each community knows what it needs to heal itself. And it is not for me, unless I am from that community, because I'm working in my hometown at the moment in Sale, where, you know, so slightly more confident about the whole thing. It's not, if they give me advice, then I have to take it on the chin, and sometimes it really hurts. But if you want a good result, you know, and you want the best for them, then that is what you have to do. Asking the community for help as a professional, you know, I put that out on Twitter one time. You know, my friends know that asking people for help makes them stronger. It makes them stronger. It's like what you do for your children, you know, and the same thing, if you do everything for them. My being as helpless as possible, which is a learned behaviour that I have, and the most useless nurse in Great Manchester, because I'm always asking the community for help, and you just see them, you know, can I ask your advice, you know, and I'm looking at somebody who can't even look at me, maybe can't even leave the house, and I ask them for some advice, and you can see them, you know, straightening up, and it's hard, but I think that's where you have to start to really, really listen, and know that a lot of the time, unless you're from that community, you're wrong. You're probably wrong. And I still am wrong a lot of the time.
I think I can see what you're saying. Dave, what do you think? What have you been thinking when you've been sat there? I can see you percolating away.
Thoughts, as always, before my thoughts, just a few questions have come in. I think one of these kind of links into stuff you've already said, and maybe you feel like you've already answered it, but if you've got any more thoughts, do you have to be part of a community to be able to do community development properly?
No, I go into all sorts of communities, and I go into the sort of communities that have been kicked about a lot, and what you've got to know what you're getting into, you know, because apparently I'm really posh. I didn't know this. People of Salford think that I'm really posh, and the reason that they tell me I'm really posh is because of the vocabulary that I have, and it's really quite scary for them. You know, I can dress like them, look like them, behave like them, do an ethnographic perspective, go sit in pubs, go and sit in cafes and listen to people. But you've got to know that you are an alien unless you're brought up down the road. First of all, they will regard you with extreme suspicion, and the more the community's been kicked around, the more likely they are to feel alienated with their health professionals, unless they've been alongside you for a long time. You've got to know that it takes you about 6 months. On average, it's 6 months before people will tell you the truth if you have a relationship with them, if they get to that point where they feel safe. I think the advantage as a health professional is that they know that you won't harm them, that you'll do the right thing, and that you will keep any information confidential, because people tell me an awful lot of things that they perhaps wouldn't tell anybody else. But I think there's huge advantages. But they also know that if they break the law, or they're working with vulnerable people and they do something wrong with those vulnerable people, they know that I will grass. I am a grass. They know that. I don't have a choice about the whole matter. And I've heard fathers declare that they hit their partner on the day out to the coast, and I'm looking like this. And they know really, on that occasion, the discipline came from other fathers. And that's the other thing, of course, as well. You don't have to intervene. That actually communities self-regulate if you set the right circumstances doing community development work. I think if you want to do community development work, you do like I do, which is apprentice yourself to somebody who's really good at it. And there's a lot of public health nurses. You may think that I'm unusual. I am not. I think there's a lot of public health and community nurses who do similar things to me. They may have trained a while back, shall we say.
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the things that I'm sort of interested in exploring a little bit more as well, in terms of how much do you think NHS or social care employed staff can do this work now versus other people doing it via things like social enterprises? Just thinking about, the huge cuts that have happened to community nurses over the last few years. And actually, is it just best to say, well, actually, there's no capacity to do that, so we need to offload that onto others that maybe can create that capacity?
Where I am in Greater Manchester, I would say that there is a renaissance in public services, staff in public services, creating a direct relationship with their communities. If you listen to Donna Hall, the former chief executive of Wigan Council, who I interviewed on another webinar called the Health Creation Academic Network that I've just set out at hcam.uk. And they set up the Wigan Deal, which is basically going into partnership, the council going into partnership with the local communities and giving those communities control. She is very clear that the staff of the council, their job is to understand the communities, sit with them, listen to them, and her also as a chief executive doing the same with her staff. When we say community, it means any community, which can include a community within an organisation. So I don't believe outsourcing community development will help, because the other thing that Donna said on that webinar was that you need to have intelligence as a commissioner, in both senses of the words, doing the right thing, but also having the knowledge of what's happening on Manor Avenue, and I do a lot of sitting and listening without doing. And I remember one of the GPs in Coventry, he was invited to go and listen to local people. And he said, well, what do you want me to do? And the nurse involved said, we don't want you to do anything. We want you to come along and listen. And he found that really difficult to do. So I think social enterprise is a lot freer. Of course, we still have the right to request. and staff can go off and form social enterprises, which are perhaps flexible enough to do some of this work. But I think it would be a mistake to outsource that direct engagement.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sort of picking up from the conversation so far is that bit about sort of local action and local activity. And I think obviously at the moment we've got a national government in England that's talking very much about kind of like a levelling up agenda, which, I would sort of suggest is probably very much kind of limited to being a soundbite and nothing sort of more progressed than that. I suppose I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago that was reflecting on Hartlepool and the kind of the local election that happened there, the by-election. And kind of one of the suggestions there about actually, communities that have been left behind, the only way that they will be able to kind of respond to that is not by waiting for a government to do anything. It will very much be about local action and local activity to try and kind of save the day. Do you kind of see that being, the way forward? Because we've not got much hope from a national government, or how do you kind of see it panning out?
I think one of the things is certainly for us as health professionals, but organisations, public sector, to understand that it is about economics and the trickle down theory of if the nation gets wealthier, the money will trickle down to hardest pressed communities. That doesn't really work. So I sort of try and listen into some very intelligent economists. And first of all, the first thing is that investing in people, investing in developing them as citizens who can become economically active. I work with guys fathers who got into employment after between 13 and 23 years and out of work. And that was a lot to do with believing in and investing in those individuals and helping them to earn a living. So as I say, I do a lot of connecting. So I like to connect people who are looking for work to build up their skills, first of all, their confidence, perhaps by volunteering in the third sector. That's huge. The evidence base for that is huge. And then when they think they may be ready for work, and some of these people are usually experiencing trauma, usually have had at least 3 adverse childhood events, and their behaviour, as you perhaps know, is affected by that because it affects the way that your brain actually develops. And I think it's about understanding why people behave as they do. So there's a lot of that. And then trying to get them towards employment. It's not my job to find them a job, but to create the enabling conditions where they do. And, if you look at sort of Lord Gus O'Donnell, for example, who was the most senior civil servant in the land and an economist, Gus. And he's saying that we shouldn't be measuring society's progress through gross domestic product. We should be measuring society's progress through well-being measures and happiness, and understanding what makes people well, which is called health creation or salutogenesis, rather than what prevents them from being, well, not just rather than, but as a balance to what prevents them from being ill. So what makes people well? Having meaning and purpose in their life, having a reason to get up in the morning, having people to care about, having a job, those sorts of things, or meaningful stuff to do during the day. And a lot of the people that I originally was working with, say in Little Hulton in Salford. By the way, Little Hulton is an extremely diverse community and lots and lots of great folk there. But I was asked to work with the most disadvantaged fathers that I could find, who when I found them, didn't necessarily leave the house, who would drink all night and sleep all day. And then I would do what I normally do, which is say, can you come and help me? I've got a bit of a problem. Can you? And immediately I gave them something to do, you know. And we judged a children's competition to find the best father in Little Hulton. That's what we actually did in that particular instance. But yeah, to focus on well-being, I think, and to focus on helping people to become economically active if they're able to be.
Yeah, and I think you've sort of brought quite a nice few threads together there really nicely. And some personally for me, you know, thinking, you know, you've said really nice things about health visitors tonight, which is always nice to hear as a health visitor. And I actually started my health visiting life in Little Hulton. That was my first student placement sort of a few years ago. So that was nice to hear. I think as well, just kind of thinking about the comments that you made about GDP, and it really sort of reminded me of Bobby Kennedy's speech that he made in 68, where he kind of talked about GDP sort of measures everything except that which is worthwhile. And, you know, I'll share that speech on Twitter after tonight's session, because it is a really nice one to read. And it really kind of, you know, again, brings some of those threads together. I suppose one of the things that, you know, I kind of reflect on from my own practice was setting up community groups, you know, thinking about when I was in Salford, the Lecture League, breastfeeding supporters groups, when I moved over to Tameside, postnatal depression, walking and running groups, and kind of thinking about the potential that would be there, you know, with the current COVID pandemic, you know, the kind of stuff that could have been done online, the kind of things now that should be done around vaccination and, you know, getting young families into vaccination centres so parents can be protected. And there's just so much to be done in there. And kind of how do you find that you pick the things, sort of, are these things passionate to you?
Well, there's some things I've been commissioned to do. So that sort of direct, you know, like, you know, how do we improve fathers' well-being, that of the children? That was one of the that's the Dudley Does It project. But I think it's to go in with that sort of humility again, Dave. You know, I'm working in Sale at the moment, which is, you know, you've got to be really careful that you don't impose your own thoughts upon the people around you. And at the moment, you know, I'm thinking there's a bit of an air quality issue going on in Carrington Moss, which is on the border between Sale West and Carrington, Partington, Urnston, that sort of area. And they're thinking to basically concrete over the moss. And of course, for somebody who's involved in respiratory care like me, that is a disaster. Yeah. And so I've joined an action group there. But I'm idly thinking there is no breathing support group, and I spoke to the community respiratory rehab team, and they said, oh, they'd really welcome that, as would South Manchester, which is right over the border where Wythenshawe Hospital is, which is a, you know, world-renowned cardiothoracic hospital. And so I'm thinking, gosh, we really need a breathing group here in Sale. We definitely do. And then alarm bells start ringing in my head, because it's not what I think at all, despite the fact that I live here and have lung problems and a bit worried about what's happening at Carrington Moss, you know, and all those extra houses and industrial units and the traffic on the Carrington Spur. But, you know, I sort of went to Coppice Avenue Library, spoke to a few folk about starting singing for lung health there. Could I hire a room? How much would it cost? Then just get chatting to the gardening group. And what struck me about that gardening group was, A, they all had mental health problems, which is why they were gardening. And the second thing was that a lot of them had lung problems. And, you know, and I just get into conversations with people. I think that's the important thing. And during those conversations, you're looking to say, is your nursing instinct? Because I have a lot, you know, there's a lot of stuff that I do that is instinctual, which is never ever to be ignored. Is that mirrored in the people that I'm speaking to or not? and I look for the energy for change. That's part of community development. Is there energy within the community to come along and work with me? Because I wouldn't run that group. I'd enable it to set up and help it to on its way. And the British Lung Foundation said that they would help me and they give me all the gen. But unless that community steps forward and shows enthusiasm, and I start to see some leaders who have probably never been leaders before, that's usually the way, not the one who say that they're the leaders. I won't do anything. So I spend a lot of time undoing my ideas because they're not mirrored in the conversations that I'm having.
Which is feedback, isn't it? Feedback that it's not the right thing at the right time for that particular group. I think it's interesting.
Well, I'll tell you about when I worked in North Solihull with Hazel Stewart Lakes, and I was just thinking about that, and there was a GP there called Anne Chitness, and who is absolutely brilliant. And we wanted to know what it is that we need to do in North Solihull to make life a bit easier for the citizens there. And Anand came to a meeting. He described that meeting where sometimes the public services are afraid of what the community might ask for in case it's not within their means. And he talked about this meeting and how he went. And first of all, he discovered that there was a vulnerable member of the community that was wandering around and nobody was doing anything about him, which was very, very important. And then he discovered that the number one thing that the citizens at that time wanted was basic clothing for their children and a bed so that they didn't have to sleep on the floor. Not much. So there's that fear that the community is going to ask for something that you can't give them. And quite often what they actually want is something very modest.
Absolutely. I've got a question here. And we don't usually get CYP students joining us. So thank you very much for your question. And they were saying a lot of what they were looking at your work online and saying you work with children. Have you got any kind of tips or hints for working in this kind of asset-based way? And it reminds me, actually, there's one thing that we wanted to talk about because we are heading towards the end. So we need to quickly make sure we've covered all our points. And one of the things that I really liked was the brownie badges. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
My first thought when I was working, because this is about my childhood, my uncontrolled asthma, mainly because the drugs weren't great then. And also I think I had gastric reflux, so every time I laid down, I had an asthma attack when I was a child. Top tip for CYP nurses and those interested in respiratory care in children. And my very, very first thought was to work with the Girl Guides. It really, really was. And actually, I started at the top and spoke to Girl Guides UK. Ended up in Wigan. Long story why I'm in Wigan. I have friends that are interested in respiratory care, citizens who are interested in respiratory care, and got me talking to the Lancashire South County Commissioner. And what occurred to me is that I think children never ever underestimate children and their ability to care for each other. They are interested in each other. They do care about each other. As you get towards secondary school, maybe slightly less so, but certainly at primary and nursery, they're really quite interested. And they're also interested in play therapy, which is very, I'm very hot on play therapy. That's how children learn. So why we give them clinical information in a straight way, I really don't know. And fun. So children want to see me again. And story, because as you know, if you've ever revised for an exam, when you put information into story, it is a lot more memorable. And I'd already been in that situation where I was in one of the deepest, darkest places of Salford, where I wasn't known, and stood up in the middle of a Halloween party to give them my version of the Big Bad Wolf has asthma and he can't blow the piggy's house down because he's not been taking his inhalers. And I thought, wouldn't this make a really great brownie badge? And the county commissioner thought the same. So we've been testing it out for best part of 6 months, from rainbows right the way through to ranges, and being able to measure how much more children know. And it works fine. Of course it works fine. They're all making model lungs out of plastic bottles, and they're all doing pebble art, where you paint the pebbles with organs of the body, and they have to put it in a diagram of the body. And we do respiratory jigsaws, and what don't we do, really? We go hunting for 10 trees that make you wheeze and sneeze. And as I'm saying these things to you, first of all, you're smiling at me.
Yeah, it's fun.
And they're fun.
Yeah.
And I was telling you, wasn't I, about treasure hunts in the 3 parks in Sale, because I'm trying to make Sale the UK's first child asthma-friendly town. And we're on our way, because the people of Sale think it's a bit of an idea. Because if they didn't, I'm on a hiding to nothing. And they had to look for people with letters asthma that spell out asthma on their back. And then each one asked a question of the child or adults, depending on their age. And one of the questions was, who do you call when somebody has an asthma attack? Explaining the symptoms of asthma. Interesting, a lot of children said 911.
Wow.
I know, 911.
Wow, that is interesting.
Who knew? But after that, a grandmother wrote to me through the medium of Messenger. So I spend a lot of time nursing on Facebook. And she wrote to me and said that her preschool child had identified a friend in the playground who was having an asthma attack and alerted a member of staff appropriately. Preschool.
Amazing, do you not think?
Well, these things
I think more scary than being a kid and not understanding how to help. But being able to have those skills is massive, isn't it? All of a sudden, your life is different.
Mind-blowing. The grandmother took the time out to tell me that. I'd written an article for Independent Nurse, because I write extensively for nursing journals. And I'd written I'd written an article around singing, helping with children's asthma, because I test that out, because we do a lot of adults with COPD and singing. So I was doing Breath Stars, which is my project, singing for lung health with children. And a German parent had read that article in Independent Nurse and thanked me because his teenage daughter had, in his words, sung away her asthma. Right? And honestly, I could weep.
Yeah.
Why don't we, as
life, isn't it?
social solutions, more where there's an evidence base? I was looking at the evidence base, actually. Singing's not in the BTS sign guidelines or NICE guidelines yet, but I'm hoping it will be, because the evidence base isn't strong enough, I think. But it works.
Let's come back to Dave just before we get ready to close. So I think there's a couple more bits to talk about that have come through on social media.
Yeah, so we've had a few comments. Kay said, measured by how the vulnerable are treated, supported, enabled, so true. Takes time and not discharge them so quickly. So that was just sort of referring to something that you mentioned earlier. And then Sarah's made a couple of comments. Fabulous, Heather. You all make sense. So I hope that means me and you as well, Nicky. And as an ex-health visitor, it was my life pre-COVID. If only people could hear you on a wider platform. To be fair, we're Facebook to the world tonight, so we're doing our we're doing our bit, aren't we, Nicky? And then also, I've tried to make groups happen, and you need that energy. You can't make it happen with apathy. And I think you're absolutely right there. It can take a huge sort of amount of effort to do it, but hopefully the effort is much sort of worth it when you get results from it. So there may well be more that I've missed out on because I've been busy tweeting myself, Nicky, but those are just a few highlights that I'd picked up on.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's talking about relational healthcare rather than transactional healthcare. This idea that you have the right to go and talk to anybody about anything and tell them what to do with themselves, and then they don't like it. Well, of course they don't. Nobody likes that. It's such a weird thing that health professionals are shocked by it. Like I turn up at your doorstep, I tell you what's wrong with you. I assume that you are incapable, and then I wonder why you don't want my unsolicited advice. Yeah.
I'm sorry to tell
you,
but I don't do lifestyleism at all. I don't talk to people about their lifestyle. And as you know, I focus on the most disadvantaged when I say this to you, that it's Maslow. And basically, there's no way, because the fathers have shown me this, because most of them smoked, and many of them roll-ups and worse, as you probably can appreciate. We did a lot of work together on enabling them to be capable, not resilient, capable, to building their capabilities through usually me giving them various tests and being the most useless person and needing lots of help, as I've explained. And then they'd come up to me, or they'd text me or message me or whatever it was, and they go, hey, it's a month since I smoked. Right? When you're in the situation that some of the citizens that I work with are in, the last thing that they want to do is give up smoking. And the last thing they want from somebody like me is me bringing up the subject of them smoking. It might be the only thing keeping them together. And they know what I think. You know, I don't move a muscle. I really, really don't. I do get out of the way of the smoke because of my lungs. But they know, and they'll, you know, you can see me on the Australian apnea conversation. I went to a conference in Australia for practice nurses, and I'll tell the story, which I can't tell now because we're running out of time, but basically how I did a health check as a practice nurse and did all the wrong things, told him that he was eating the wrong foods and he was smoking and da-di-da. And actually, he changed everything, because nurses are incredibly powerful, including stopping drinking without any detox, which absolutely scared me to death.
I can imagine.
But he was ready, you know, progesterone, diclomenti, cycle of change. Also, they've got to be ready for you. And if they're not ready for you, you might as well talk to the wall. But he was ready for me. And completely changed life. But most of the time now, I don't even bring any of that up. Because they know.
I think we should probably stop there, because I think there's things that students will be picking up on. They understand the Maslow, they understand the Prochaska, and all that stuff is going to start to make sense. So I think I can't thank you enough for today's session, because it ties together so many different things that all the fields of nursing need to understand, and also that idea about, you know, how people can lead, and also how nursing is not just ward-based or hospital-based. It's actually happening on social media. It's happening on WhatsApp. It's happening on phones. It's happening in people's lives. And I love the relevancy of this work. I think it's really exciting. I wonder if you've got anything that you wanted just to leave the audience with, and then we'll come to Dave just to finish us and close out.
I think to look, everybody's good at something. Yeah, that's the one. Everybody's good at something. And in my experience doing asset-based community development, it is the most unlikely character who will make the biggest difference. It isn't the community leader, the one who talks most. It is usually the one that's been hiding in their house for 3 years, who can't even look you in the eye, can't shake your hand, and you will see, as a health professional, something in that person, and it is your job to try to draw it out of them by telling them what they're good at. And if you're right, they will transform in front of you.
Thank you for that. Dave, is there anything you wanted to add?
Right, so I did want to say about next week's episode. We've got a big one coming up next week. Obviously, hard to beat Heather, but they're going to try. So it's Professor Alison Leary is joining us next week. And she is going to be talking about Protect Nurse and the petition that she's been running. That's a really important issue for anyone that is a nurse and anyone that ever receives healthcare from nurses. Lots of people don't know that nurse isn't actually a protected title. The protected title is registered nurse, and Alison's trying to change that. Unite, we've been really concerned about that for a while too, and we've been arguing that this needs to change too. So she's going to be on next week with our lead for regulation, Jane Beach, and they'll be discussing that. And then we're going to go the week after to talk about student nurses. We've got, I think, 3 or 4 student nurses that are going to join us on that episode. And then the week after, we're going to have Kath Gamble on to talk about leadership and change. So we've got a nice kind of arc there of lots of really relevant subjects coming up. So I just wanted to sort of say that before we left tonight, Nicky. Hope you don't mind.
I thought it was excellent. I'm glad you did it. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time tonight. If you do have questions, please stick them on either the Twitter feed or on Facebook, and we'll circle back and have a look over the next couple of days. But thank you so much. It's been lovely to see you. And take care, guys. Night-night.
Night-night. Thanks, Heather.
Bye.
Bye.